I never know. As I see the numbers increasing as people are coming into the to join this webinar, I never know if everyone's there already or if people are still on their way in. I just see the numbers increasing for how many participants we have. Okay, so let's get started. My name is Dr. Chaim Nistel. I am YU's Vice Provost for Student Affairs, and I'll be moderating tonight's conversation. I'd like to thank our panelists and others who have joined, and I'd like to thank our participants, all of you, for taking time out of the evening for this important topic about how are we going to help our children and ourselves manage this coming year. There are some types of problems. Every type of problem has a different type of solution. There are some types of problems that we can solve, and there's some types of problems that we can't solve. And the best we can do is hope to manage them. Getting a plane ticket, deciding on a seminary or a yeshiva, figuring out how to pack everything, getting it into those 2 suitcases, those are problems that we solve. Each one of you will finish your packing, you'll get to the airport, you'll catch your flight. Those are very solvable problems. Managing our emotional health over the year is not a problem we're going to solve. It's a problem we're going to manage. And we're going to do the best we can to help our kids, and through this conversation, to really help you, the parents who are sending your children off to Israel, to best manage this year, which will be a year of growth for your children, hopefully for all of us. The format tonight, we're going to start by hearing from each of the panelists for a few minutes. And following that, we're going to open the floor for some questions and answers. I already have a list of questions that have been submitted, and we'll be open to questions from the floor as well. You should see the Q&A section where you're able to type in questions anonymously, so you can really ask anything you want. I'm honored to be here to moderate with my esteemed colleagues. We're going to start with Dr. Yael Muscat. She's the director of the YU Counseling Center. I've had the privilege of working closely with her when I was director of the Counseling Center, and she was associate director. So I'd like to ask Dr. Muscat to open up with some words.
Thank you, Dr. Nistel. So welcome, everybody. And, we know that everybody on this call is sending their children off to Israel in this very unusual year. And every year there's stresses before we send our children off to Israel. And we have to keep that in mind throughout this entire process, that every year has its own stresses. But this year is obviously highly unusual. There's a couple of parts of it that are a little stressful. One is the mandatory quarantine right when your children are coming to Israel, and we're going to talk about that. And one is also the entire year. The entire year might look different. And we don't know in what way exactly, but things like where they'll be able to go for Shabbos, how much freedom they'll have to, kind of travel the country, how many visitations they're going to get. So all those kinds of things add a certain amount of stress in terms of that we don't know what to expect, and we're going to talk about that. So we really want to provide you with some insights today and some encouragement, and we want to, give you a feeling of security when you send your children off, because there are many ways in which this experience can be really, really meaningful and important for them. So by way of introduction, I'm going to start with some broad ideas for how we can frame the way that we think about this year so that we can keep going back to these over the year as things happen. And I'm going to introduce about 5 mantras or statements that you can kind of say to yourself throughout the year. So the first is to expect the unexpected. And the brain does not want to do that. Our brain very much wants to know what to expect. We seek assurance, we seek security, we seek certainty. And a lot of anxiety comes from the idea of uncertainty. But at the same time, living with and tolerating uncertainty is a very, very important skill. And if your children are able to do this, you will create resiliency in them. And Dr. Pelkovitz is going to speak more about that. But the mantra of expect the unexpected and it will make you stronger can really be very helpful. Meaning when you're sending your children off, explain to them that many of the things that they expect to happen may or may not happen. There might be changes along the way. And that's okay. That doesn't mean it's not going to feel bad. It doesn't mean they're not going to be sad about things that are canceled or anxious about what's going to happen. But the more that they understand that this year is going to bring unexpected things, and the more they realize that if they can tolerate that, they will be stronger for it. It can really, it's something that you should feel secure about, that you're sending your children off and they may actually gain a skill for life that can really help them. So the more the expectations are there and are understanding that things may happen that they don't expect. At the same time, the next mantra goes with that, but it's a little contradictory to that. So expect the unexpected and be prepared for it, but also be in the moment. We have to explain to them and to us ourselves that, yeah, things are going to happen that they don't know. And you have to be prepared. But at the same time, if you're spending all the time worrying about what's going to happen next and knowing it might not happen the way you want, you're going to miss so much of what's around you. The more we can help them be in the moment, which we basically do by redirecting our mind constantly to where we are right now. So that's something we could do pretty easily even when they call us. And what's going to be about this and what's going to be about that? You can easily sort of redirect them to, well, what's happening right now? How much are you enjoying who you're with right now? Is there something going on that you're calm about, that you like? Can we do something that you like right now? So the more we can practice that skill for ourselves and for our children to be in the moment. The third one is lefum tzara agra, right? The harder something is, the more we work towards something, the more we value it, the more we enjoy it, the more we get out of it, and the more sacrifice there is, the more you know that you value it. And I think in this particular instance, the idea that our students and our children are sacrificing so much to go to Israel, it's not their regular year and it's not what they expected, and yet they're doing it, and it's not going to be easy. They're going to have this 2-week quarantine. They're going to have other things. The more that they understand that this is something they really want, and the more that they might really appreciate it. And just to date myself, the year that I went to Israel was the year of the Gulf War. And unfortunately, many of us had to go home and many of us didn't have to go home. But certainly the people that were able to stay there, as difficult as it was, to be in some sort of quarantine. I mean, they had to be, in shelters and all of that. They repeatedly talk about that experience as one of the most formative experiences of their year. So, the more that you are willing to sacrifice, the more that they'll be able to get out of it. And that's something that we have to remember as well. The other mantra is silver linings. And I know we've been saying that a lot throughout this entire COVID experience. In all of the hardships, there's also silver linings. And we want to help our children see all the benefits that they're actually going to get from this kind of year. They're going to immerse themselves much more than usual in the seminary or yeshiva they're in. They have opportunities to get closer with the rebbeim and the students that they're with. They're going to have experiences that other people around them have not had before. So the more you can help them see the silver lining behind some of the experience that they're going to have, the better off I think they're going to be. The next one is we're all in it together. And I think that can really help in many ways. One is that, they're doing this together. There's going to be a lot of togetherness, especially at the beginning, right? With the quarantine and the 6 people that they're going to be with. But in general, they're doing this experience together with the people in their country. We always hear about things that happen in Israel. This isn't the first year that something hard's happening in Israel, by the way. I think we need to keep that in mind too. There are years that people send their kids during terrorist attacks and things that are extremely difficult. And I know that as Americans, we're sitting here in America, we always have this feeling of it's hard to be so far away. And especially during the situation now that we can't even get on a plane and go to Israel. And these students are getting a chance to go. And if we could keep reminding them, they're going to be doing coronavirus together with their people in their country, in their land. And that's something that they can always feel that they can be proud of, and they can feel good about that. And those kinds of things can help them get through the difficult experience, both of quarantine and possibly of what might happen afterwards. And then the last one is kind of the same. It's a little, they can keep telling themselves, it's worth it. What they're doing is worth it. The quarantine is worth it because it's protecting themselves and others. The entire experience is worth it because they're getting to be in Israel. So just to kind of recap, expect the unexpected, be in the moment, lefum tzara agra, the more you work, the more you enjoy. There's silver linings in everything. We're in it together and it's worth it. And if we can just remember some of those, I think we can kind of use that as an overall overview for getting through what might be a little bit challenging. In the last few minutes I have, I'm going to be quick. I did want to just touch on that there are specific techniques that you and your children can use while you're getting through quarantine specifically, and maybe throughout the year as well. I'm sure we'll have some time to talk about it later, but I just want to mention a few. One is feelings. There's going to be a lot of feelings. When they feel strong feelings, let them name the feeling that they have, allow themselves to have it, and know that it's going to wash over them. If they feel very sad, it's okay. It's going to pass. Explain to your children these feelings come and they go. There's nothing to be afraid of, nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to be ashamed of being angry or upset, but it's going to pass. Let them name it and let it pass. A couple of things that have, we keep saying over and over again throughout this entire coronavirus: routine. Try and emphasize from the beginning, even though things are so not routine, try and have and establish a routine. Have at least 2 to 3 things a day, even in quarantine, that you do at the same time every day. Whether it's daven, eat, go to the classes that you're supposed to go to. Obviously, that's also important. Participate in the things that are being given to you. Try and establish a time that you wake up every day, time that you go to sleep every night. It's not realistic. They're not going to do it the first day they get there. They're just not. They're going to go to sleep very late. They're going to wake up late. But over time, try and emphasize with them to do things regularly as much as they can. Support. So speak to your friends, speak to your family. Martin, Dr. Gall is going to speak a little bit about how to set some boundaries with that, but that's very important. Exercise. And I know you're going to ask me, how can you do exercise in quarantine? I know the yeshivas, which have been amazing in planning all of this and working so hard, have tried to set up, mini exercise routines. They're sending things through the door. I think they're giving them weights in some of the places. Whatever it is, you could do jumping jacks in your room. You could do, they show that very vigorous exercise can really change your mood. Trying to just put in some forms of exercise is very, very important. And then the last one is try to talk to your children about media use. And that's a bigger topic, but to set some kind of boundaries for them, for yourselves, and for them with how much media use they're using in that room, how much news. There's definitely research that shows the more news you're watching, the worse your mood gets. So try to kind of, explain that to them. And in general, not to be using the media too much. So those kind of boundaries. And there's definitely others that we could get to, but I think I'm gonna hold off now and pass it off to my wonderful colleague, Dr. Gala, to talk a little bit more about the parent piece.
Okay. Dr. Martin Gala is the Associate Director of the YU Counseling Center. I've enjoyed working very closely with him as well, and I'm sure we'll find his words inspiring. Please unmute and then speak, Martin.
That someone has to always do that, right? Be muted. You're not supposed to be. All right, so that's me. Thank you, Dr. Nissel. Thank you, Dr. Muscat. So I just wanted to follow up a little bit on what Dr. Muscat was saying and start with also thanking you all for coming and taking the time out. The year in Israel can be challenging in general, meaning sending your kid away for a year, being away from them for a little while, them leaving you, you leaving them. That presents its own challenge and its own type of anxiety and concern. But as we know, this year, there's kind of a double concern with the obvious COVID issue. So not only is the separation difficult in general, but this year it's especially difficult with all the uncertainty that Dr. Muscat was referencing. So I wanted to first give you all credit, and you should appreciate this decision. It's obviously not the easiest decision to send your kids and for your kids to go. So everyone should feel good about how they're sending their kids to Israel now and doing it even with everything that's going on. It's not a small thing; it's a big thing. As we talk about, Dr. Muscat and I, a lot about how we see the difference, or we see how students mature and develop in their year in Israel. We get to see them on campus. We get to see them right away. And we really notice how impressive, how much more mature they are, how much they've gained just from being away, just from having time to think, just from having time to know themselves and understand themselves better. So you should all be very proud of yourselves, you that are going and those that are sending. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, just following up on what Dr. Muscat said, in terms of the uncertainty, as we all know, as we've been hearing for so long, living with the uncertainty and living with the unknown. and also the normalizing of the anxiety. If you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling nervous, that's normal and that's okay. But in terms of continuing on that, just building on that, it's important to try to know, or it's important to try to understand a few points about anxiety and a few points about how your anxiety can play out versus how your children's anxiety can play out. And I think, one thing that I want to focus on that I don't think is it might be a little bit obvious, but I think is important to think about is there's a real difference oftentimes between what we experience as our anxiety versus what our children experience. And it's important to remember that since those things are different types of anxieties, we have to deal with them in different types of ways. So I think the first step when we're trying to understand how we're feeling versus how our kids may be feeling, if there is no overlap, is to just be aware, to just understand and to take a few moments to think about what it is that you're nervous about. If there is something that you're nervous about, what is it? How is it playing out? And how does it apply to you? And I think sometimes we may take for granted that this is an actual exercise. It's a time to reflect. It's time to think about, and to give yourself some time to think about and to acknowledge what it is that you might be nervous about. And to understand that once you realize what you are nervous about, you want to be careful to try your best. And again, we're not perfect and it's difficult to do, but we want to try our best to limit passing that along to our children in conversation. And again, that might be a subtle point, but I think it is important to really think about and understand where our anxiety begins and where our children's anxiety begins. And when we're going to have, and kind of to put that idea, it's an understanding, put that theory into practice and to be mindful when we're having the conversation, which I think leads to my second point, which is all important decisions in life, any kind of investment that we're making. One of the most important pieces is to prepare and to ready ourselves for that kind of decision, for that experience that we're going to be going through. So, I mean, I personally like sports, so I like to use sports analogies. And this would be akin to like having a game plan, to being prepared with some idea of how the year is going to play out, or how we're going to be approaching this year. And I think the game plan in this situation is to really set aside time and to sit down with your kids and to have a conversation with them about how they are viewing the year. We know how we're feeling about the year, or at least we think we know how we're feeling about the year and what we're concerned about. But sometimes it's interesting to hear how that might be different coming from our kids. So I think it's important to set aside time, and I'm sure many of you are doing this or thinking about doing it. But it could really, really help preparing ourselves and going into the year when we can have this open conversation with our kids about what they're thinking about and how they're viewing it. And when you're having this conversation, you should try, again, you're not going to be graded on it. It's not something that you can fail at, but kind of trying to stay away from yes and no questions, and keeping things open-ended, keeping things kind of open and exploratory. You'll be surprised about how much you can learn about your kids and about how much you can gain from the conversation when we allow them to kind of go with their own thoughts and their own feelings about it. And we can learn a tremendous amount about how they're looking at approaching the year and what their concerns are. So I think like an example of this would be, if I was sending my kids to Israel right now, I would be, obviously, in my opinion, I'd be most concerned about the quarantine. How is this going to work? How are they going to be quarantined? What's going to happen, etc. I think it's a normal thing to be worried about. How is this going to work in a foreign country? Your kids may be concerned about that too, but they may not be. And it might be something else that they're concerned about. So we want to try to stay away from listing our concerns and sharing our concerns, and stay more with what are you thinking about? How are you going to look at this year? Because we don't want to double up. If they're concerned about something else and then you bring up your concern about quarantine and how scary that could be, they might also then begin to be scared about that. So we want to try to limit that kind of conversation and keep it more focused on them. The other piece of it is, I think you can acknowledge that you don't necessarily have to have all the answers right away on the spot. I think especially when it comes to something like this, a lot of what we're learning about is that we don't know all the answers or even some of the answers. That's what Dr. Muscat was talking about in terms of the uncertainty. This is what we've been living through with COVID this entire time, is we don't have all the answers. So sometimes it's okay to say we don't know right away. And they might even appreciate you coming back to them and reflecting and thinking about what they're saying, what they're concerned about. And some of your kids may not want to talk about anything. And they may not want to share any concerns with you. That's okay too. Dragging and forcing the conversation can actually do more damage and can create, more pressure. So we want to give them space. We want to create an environment where your kids feel safe. And I'm sure many of you have already created that environment. I guess we want to just foster that and continue that, and allow them to feel like they can always come to us and always talk to us about what's going on. I think in terms of just something specifically that we were thinking about, when you do want to convey some sort of advice, or you do want to share something with them, I think an important thing to think about sharing, especially if you believe it, is trusting in the schools. I know from speaking to Rebbeim and counselors on my own, therapists that I know in Israel on my own that work in these yeshivas, they have been working on this for a long, long time. They have been thinking about COVID for months now and thinking about how they're going to approach it and what they're going to do with the new students that arrive. So I think that we can give them that kind of trust that we believe the schools know what they're doing. And just like we don't want to give over our fears onto our kids and have them adopt that, I think the opposite could be true here. We can give over this trust to our kids and have them adopt that, and have them feel like they have people to turn to in Israel. If they do need to talk to someone, these yeshivas are ready. The seminaries and yeshivas are all ready, and they want to be able to engage your kids. This is what they live for. This is what they do. And they want to be able to connect with your kids. And they've been preparing for this. They don't have it down to a science, and they don't know it perfectly. None of us knows any of this perfectly. But this is what they've been working on. This is what they've been doing. So to give that over to your kids and let them know there are places they can go to speak to, and to give them that freedom to try to work on their struggles themselves. Not that you're leaving them high and dry, but kind of this balance of listening to them, being empathic, and then also letting them try to work it through on their own by either reaching out to someone else in the yeshiva, or reaching out to a friend, or trying to think through what they're going through. I think that is the growth that we're talking about. That's the growth that we see. And there's really no better opportunity than right now, than going to Israel right now for that kind of growth. So there's a tremendous opportunity here, as we've all been saying. And again, I commend all of you, and I give you all so much credit, and your kids so much credit for going. This is an amazing, amazing year. And I think it'll still be that even with COVID. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gala. I'd like to introduce Dr. Pelkovitz. He holds the Strauss Chair in Psychology and Jewish Education at the Azrieli Graduate School of Jewish Education Administration. I've also had the pleasure of working with Dr. Pelkovitz for a few decades. So thank you for joining us this evening, and let's give Dr. Pelkovitz the floor.
Hello there. Okay. I'm gonna, actually, my colleagues did such a great job of summarizing everything. I'll just bounce off it, many of the same points, but in a new key. Number one, I'm going to focus on a little bit about the perspective taking. I've often been inspired by the insights of the Tiferes Yisrael. So in the early 1800s, I think he wrote his main parish in 1820 on Mishnayos. So in Avos, on the Mishnah that says Havigol Makom Torah, he has a fascinating insight. He says, we will never master our parents' values or Torah values in the comfort of our parental home. He says the only way to really be able to truly make the values we grow up with our own is to leave the comfort of, he talks about sitting in one's mother's lap, the comfort of being in the safe haven of a beautiful Jewish home, and to go off to a completely alien place. He says it's only then that we're able to truly master and understand and internalize the essence of what we've learned until now. So I often think about that, because to the extent that we can give meaning and purpose in that deep way to understanding why this year is such an incredible gift to our children, especially this year, it's, I think, helpful to think about that aspect of why we do it. That's point number one I wanted to make. Point number two has to do with the fact that we have to remember that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to coping. Everybody has a different style of coping. Some of us have children who cope by trying to distract themselves. Others of us have children who cope by talking things out and talking things out with you and with their friends. Others are more writers or more artistic. Others are more musical. There's so many different approaches to coping. Chazal say this a number of times when they talk about Dagobla Yashchena, the pasuk in Mishlei that says that how do we deal with worry? We can either deal with worry by Yashchena, coming from Hesach Hadas, with Sin V'Samach Mischalfen, basically distracting ourselves. Just don't think about it. Another way of thinking is talk it out. Light up the language centers of the brain and name the monster. And interestingly, nowhere in the words of our rabbis does it say that one way is better than others. We have to find what's the best toolbox of coping mechanisms for our kids. And it's going to go back and forth in many different ways. And then be at their side in fostering their ability to gradually figure out what works best for them. So that's point number two. And then the other point I wanted to make is the whole idea of the power of connection, which we talked about. But I just wanted to talk about it with a little bit of a different kind of focus. I once worked with a colleague who's a huge expert in post-traumatic stress disorder. And he said to me, he said, David, listen, if you want to really know how with one question to predict resilience in somebody you're working with, just ask him or her one question. Do you have one person in your life who you could wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to talk about something that you're really worried about? And I was fascinated by that, because it seems like it's getting to the core of it. The power of being at somebody's side during tough times or even not during tough times. The day my colleague told me that, 3 o'clock in the morning, I shake my wife, who's sleeping right next to me, and I say, Lonnie, can you wake up? I have to talk to you. And I was primed to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And she jumps out of bed. She says, sure, what is it? What do you want to talk about? And I say, that's okay, you can go back to sleep. And she luckily didn't remember it the next day. But there's that component of being at somebody's side as a core ingredient of resilience. And finally, the most important thing of all is to leave room for meaning making. In just about in the years I've been working with different kinds of trauma and different kinds of populations, one of the things that comes up over and over again is, to the extent that, as we heard from my colleagues before this, to the extent that we can facilitate meaning making meaning that to ask some basic questions, what's the source of growth in what we're going through? And there I'll just end with the beautiful words in the Medrash Tehillim that to me gets to the heart of what this year is all about for our kids, with the amazing gift that they're being given, not only in spite of the difficulty, but because of the difficulty. So the Medrash Tehillim tells us, I'm sure you've heard this before, but you're stuck with me. I'm going to say it anyway. Ilu nafalti lo kamti. If I never fell down, I never would have gotten up. Ilu yashafti bachoshech lo haya'arli. If I never sat in the darkness, I never would have appreciated the light. That's what this year is about. It's teaching our kids in a way that they're going to be at each other's sides, experiencing the real ingredients of growth, even if at times it's going to be a little challenging and a little bit difficult. And at least in my experience, after the initial challenge and the initial difficulty, they invariably end up coming up with the lessons of getting up in the face of adversity and the lessons of appreciating the light in the face of darkness. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to introduce Jerry Mansdorf, who's our Director of YU's Admission. And I'm sure many of you have already interacted with her and her team of wonderful admission staff. And also Stephanie Strauss, who is Director of Everything YU Israel. And she's joining us now at 2:30 in the morning. So thank you, Stephanie, for pulling together this program, along with Jerry and the rest of the team, and for joining us this evening. Let's go to some of your questions. I know this is a Q&A format. Okay. I'm finding myself very anxious and sad about this year. I'm going to miss my child terribly. Is this normal, and what should I do about it? Whoever wants to take it.
I could jump in for this one, I think.
Okay.
If that's okay with the two of you,
Yeah.
or whoever else. Yeah, so I think I would begin by saying, yes, it's normal. I think, first of all, I'm impressed that you understand what you're feeling, which is very good. That you have a sense that you are upset and you're going to miss your child terribly. You love your child, so you're going to miss them. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think in terms of what you can do about it, I'm not sure, that would be the start of the conversation with your child necessarily. Again, we don't want to create that, like I was saying before, I don't know if we want to create that added pressure or that feeling that the child will feel somehow bad about going to Israel. We don't want to do that. But I think that it's okay to feel this way, and it's okay to talk about that with someone. And perhaps there is someone in your life that you can share that feeling with, and discuss that with, and kind of explore with. So it is normal, and it is okay to talk about it, and I think it's okay to try to figure out what to do with it. But I don't know if necessarily that's something you're going to want to place onto your kid at this point. As we were saying before, we want to be able to try to separate and create those boundaries, which are good for you and good for your children, and try to move forward in that way. I don't know if my colleagues have anything they want to add. Please feel free.
Great.
Okay. This next question is almost a similar question, but something I could, it resonates with me. How long should I expect to cry after I say goodbye to my child at the airport? Personally, for me, it was a few weeks. But I'm wondering if any of the panelists have any way of responding to that.
I'll just say one point on the crying. If you cry tears because of an allergy, and you take those tears and put them under a microscope, those tears would be made up of water and salt and nothing else. Emotional tears, the kind of tears that I remember crying for each of my kids when they went off for the year, the kind of tears that come with life's inevitable separations and hopefully reunions. If you put those tears under a microscope, they have in them stress hormones, literally stress hormones, so that as you're crying, you're literally shedding your stress. You're dealing with your stress. Chazal tell us that in many different places. The benefit of tears, the benefit of the gift of crying. Obviously, it has to be done in a way that you give yourself permission to do it. It's not a bad way of modeling for your kids also, but also being able to pull it together also so they know that you're okay. But give yourself permission to be human. That's probably the most important advice that any of us could give you this evening.
Okay, thank you. How can I help my child if he or she is having difficulty with a teacher or a roommate? Dr. Muscat, why don't you take that one? Unmute.
Sorry about that. Okay. So I think the answer to that is really the same for seminary as it's going to be for college. It might be a little bit different than it is in high school, although, towards the end of high school, we should be getting to that as well, which is basically trying to give them the tools to deal with it by themselves. So to realize they're calling you. Why are they calling you? They might be calling you to fix it, but that doesn't mean we have to grab onto that opportunity. That's not the only reason they're calling you. They might be calling you to reflect. They might be calling you to vent. They might be calling you for advice. We as parents want to jump in. We want to fix things. And that's something I know about a lot. There's room for that sometimes, but it's not the first thing that we should do. The first thing that we should do is try and empower them to help themselves in whichever way that they can. And that's not any different just because there's unknowns about this year or because they're in quarantine. Even though we feel like it is, we feel like everything is so much worse, we should at least help them with this. Or they're never gonna, now they're gonna have this roommate forever that they're in this room with for 6 weeks, for 2 weeks. How are they gonna, we can panic. So I think the first thing is not to panic, not to overreact to the situation, to calmly discuss with them, what are some options that you think we can do? Who can help you with this? What have you tried already? Now, they might tell you that none of your solutions are going to work. They might tell you they've tried that already. They might tell you they're not going to do it. But if you very calmly and believe in this, give them the options, try not to panic, try and set that distance, they might surprise you and they might go ahead and try it anyway. So I think the first thing is to separate, to really be a good receiver of some of that. Dr. Gallo said, find an outlet for your own stress about their problem, and then try and work with them together to try and find a solution. I think if there's an emergency, if you're feeling very, I don't like to say that a parent should never, ever, ever act. I don't think, I think there's exceptions. If you feel your child is unsafe, it's your responsibility to take care of that. But other than that, try and empower them to take care of it themselves.
Okay, this is a very similar question, but maybe perhaps another panelist can respond. What do I do if my child calls me in a very real panic? So I guess the child is stressing out more than the usual help with a roommate situation.
Somebody else want to jump in on that?
Dr. Pelkovitz, why don't you take that one?
Oh, okay.
Real panicked child.
I was gonna suggest more, but that's fine. Okay. Yeah. So the first thing to do is to be understood, first understand. Just listen. Give them permission to first hear them out. Have them name the monster by talking about what it is that they're panicked about. Don't try to give false reassurance by saying it's okay or by not validating it. Number one is you validate the feeling, you allow them to name it, and then you empathically tell them that you're with them. The next point, I think, is in terms of what to say to yourself. Now, of course, there are all kinds of ways of grounding them and giving them simple breathing exercises and relaxation exercises. But the bottom line, I think, is what do you say to yourself? There's this magnificent thought in the Gemara, Ein Adam Omed al Divrei Torah Elam Kein Nichshel Behem. You can't master anything without failure, without frustration, and without coming through tough times. So you just let them know that it's okay, it's fine. Having a high level of anxiety is what our body does when faced with a difficult situation. And the main thing is just being there at their side. Don't underestimate the power of letting them know that you're at their side. Martin, did you want to pick up on that at all, or?
I think you nailed it. Perfect. What can I add to you? It's perfect.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll give Martin the next question. I expect the yeshivot will do a great job with the initial 14-day quarantine. It's almost like a boot camp and everyone is in it together. However, once Rabbeim and staff are coming in and out, there's a likelihood that other students will be exposed. I'm concerned about a secondary 2-week quarantine that might only affect a few students in a yeshiva. How can I help my kid from losing it?
Okay, all right. Okay, so we'll assume that your kid is going to be losing it. We'll start with that. So again, I think it's kind of like what we've been saying throughout the evening, that yes, we can't help from thinking about the future. It's impossible not to think about things that are coming down the road. We can't control our mind and our thoughts. We can't control what thoughts we have. But at the same time, there is some power in trying to be in the moment. And that doesn't mean we just, out of sight, out of mind, we don't think about anything. But it does mean that right now we try to control what we can control. And there may be a second wave. Will be, there won't be, there's all kinds of different opinions. And we can think about a second wave and what it would be like, but I think that what we can control is trying to deal with the moment now. We can try to think about potential scenarios, but not let that get out of control. And we can think in general terms about how we would deal with it if it would come about. But I think that what's more powerful is trying to stay in the moment, trying to handle what's in front of us with, like we were saying before, with the proper preparation, general preparation. And we could also, like we were saying, trust that the schools are also going to be ready. Since we're thinking about a second wave, the schools also will be thinking about a potential second wave. And just to cap it off, I once heard a psychologist say, I don't remember who it was, I would quote him, that we can...
It was Dr. Pelkovitz.
It wasn't Dr. Pelkovitz. It was actually on the radio, and it was just, they happened to be having a conversation about COVID. It was about COVID. And he said something that really stuck with me. He said that, believe it or not, we can handle anything in a moment. So yes, we can't handle like a downpour of feelings and 1,000 things happening at once and thinking a million years into the future. But what's ever happening to us right now, we can deal with. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to be happy about it. It doesn't mean it's going to be exciting and fun. That's not what I mean by deal with or accept. But in the moment, we can accept and try to cope with almost anything that's happening to us. And that's very powerful. And so that's what I would say to someone I was treating and someone that I was working with. I would say it empathically and non-judgmentally, but I would try to convey this kind of message that we can deal with what's happening right now. What's happening later, we will deal with when later comes. We can still prepare and think about it, but the emotional, like Dr. Pelkovitz was talking, the emotional pieces and all of that, right now we can deal with what's in the moment. So that's kind of the message I would deliver.
I think that's a great message. Very often people are worried or anxious about things that are still yet to come or might be coming, and focusing on the here and now and making it, one day at a time, they'll get through most anything. Next question is for Dr. Muscat. What are some ways to help my child think more positively?
So that's assuming that, as Martin was saying, that they're thinking negatively. But some negative thoughts, give me 1 second, I'm sorry. Some negative thoughts that people tend to have are things like catastrophizing, negative filtering. These are common thought distortions. So catastrophizing is sort of thinking the worst ahead, everything terrible that's going to happen, a little bit like the previous question. Negative filtering is there's 100 good things happening, but you tend to focus on the one negative thing. Black and white thinking, things are all good or all bad. a lot of, I guess, another way of calling this is sort of FOMO, or this feeling of like everybody else is having a better time, or comparing, or always thinking about what could have been, but isn't happening now. So those are just like some common thought distortions. And we're calling them thought distortions because they're really not totally accurate. They're not the most effective way to think. Now, it's not so easy to change your mindset, but if you can explain to them and label these even, and you can find more of them online, if you can even know that this is the kind of thought you're having, you can ask them to replace it or to add another type of thought to it. So, without being critical, because I think, parents can never be therapists. It doesn't usually go together. But, in a more casual way, you can kind of talk about, I hear all of these negative things that are happening, but I see you're really focusing, is there anything more positive that's also happening? You can label that thought as a thought that's focusing on the negative. You could use the word catastrophizing, again, not in a critical way, but that you're creating a catastrophe. It's more realistic that maybe something less terrible might happen, or that might not happen at all. In terms of the comparisons, I think it's going to be challenging this year for students to not necessarily compare, forget about another yeshiva, maybe in another room during the quarantine. And you have to and then to what it could have been. And I think the more we can just redirect, so validate the feeling that it's hard, you feel like you're missing out on what could have been, and then try to redirect as much as possible. So we don't try to erase negative thoughts and feelings, we just try to add more positive ones, label them as something distorted, and add something either more positive, more correct. So with the whole comparing situation, I think, you can encourage them to focus a little bit more on what's happening now, and also that we never know what's going on in the other place, and that they could be missing out on exactly what's happening in front of them if they're focusing on something else. And then the other trick with negative thoughts, because we can't always change them, is to try and separate from them a little bit, to try and sort of see them as thoughts, to teach them to say, I'm having an anxious thought, not I'm anxious, or I'm having a negative thought right now, meaning I'm not my thought, I'm having a thought. To kind of teach them slowly to, visualize the thought as something outside of themselves. They often say as a leaf on water, or, to sort of see it as a suitcase going through the belt, the conveyor belt, like I'm having these thoughts, they're not me. Now, we can't do this if we don't practice it ourselves. These are things you could do, you could do more research on online and everything, but it's just ideas of ways to kind of start to talk to them. And I will say that if you notice these patterns in your children, they're not starting right now. They're probably something that's been there before. So I just want to, a little plug for some CBT and some ACT therapy. I'm not saying everybody needs to be in therapy at all, but if you see these sort of repetitive patterns, you could talk to them about the idea of seeing a therapist for a little bit, or even giving them a resource. There's apps online, CBT apps online that help them with these things. So that's, obviously getting a little deeper into it, but I just thought I would mention it in this moment because it's, if it continues and continues, it's something to think about. I don't know if anybody wants to add to that.
Dr. Pelkovitz, was there something you wanted to add?
No, that was
Okay.
perfect.
Okay. So I guess a follow-up question I see in the chat is, can YU help with referrals to mental health professionals in Israel if needed? I'll answer that. Basically, most of the yeshivot and seminaries have strong connections. They often have mental health professionals as part of the team that is working with your child. But if you're looking for an outside therapist and you're not getting the right referral in Israel, we can certainly try to help you. We have worked over the years with a number of really great therapists in Israel. I see a question here. I'm going to ask Stephanie Strauss to answer, please. If my child needs to see a doctor during this crazy time, how would that be facilitated?
So every student that's going to Israel certainly has pre-arranged insurance policies and protocols with their school, usually a group type of an arrangement that the school administrators mandate and facilitate, or in some cases privately. There are some conditions, obviously, that students go with pre-existing and concerns that they've already worked on between their parent and the school administration. So depending on the nature of the concern, there is always access to medical professionals. So that either it's through their insurance policy or it's through a personal family arrangement that was made in advance. The administrators also, as you mentioned before, not just in mental health professionals, but in regular medical doctors of all kinds. The school administrators and their providers have great access to medical professionals. And in the worst case, of course, there are always, just like in the States and other places, there are urgent care facilities as well for emergent situations that have to be dealt with. There are medical advisors that are act as consultants to help. So I don't think any student that needs to seek medical attention of any kind, mental health or other general medicine, should have any issue getting access to care.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm wondering what happens to the college credits if the year in Israel becomes abbreviated. For example, what if they start after the Chagim or they come home in middle of the year?
Do
Okay,
you want me to take that as well?
sure, if you can.
Okay, so I'll just, I'll tell you that we as a university, and certainly the admissions office, Jerry and I and our groups, work very closely with the Israel schools that we're affiliated with. We're in very close contact with them over the entire year and every year, certainly in this past year and in the coming year preparation. And I'll say that in the last year, we worked beautifully together with the schools to ensure a seamless transition on a very unprecedented and difficult circumstance of schools having to redirect everything toward an online delivery system. And that went very, very well. And because the schools were extremely responsible and had a tremendous amount of investment in these classes and in this programming, things worked well enough for us to be able to offer academic credit to our students. Look, that was as what we would call a b'diavad, not having anticipated that. In the going forward toward this coming year, the schools, I can tell you, having worked with them throughout this past summer, are very well prepared, as you can see from this call and the time we've spent having these conversations, not just with our parents here, but as well with the administrators themselves. They are well prepared for many scenarios and have prepared full course loads, a very rigorous academic schedule that I'm sure they're prepared to go ahead with. And given these circumstances, I'm also certain that they have put in place lots of fail-safes and different ways of delivering their academics to ensure an academic program, a curriculum that has great integrity and robust content. In the worst case, we believe the schools will go the full year. We believe they've built a physical facility framework to do that. In the worst case scenario, if the schools were beyond anyone's control, government, safety, health-wise, were forced to close, we would do just as we did last year and work closely with our colleagues in Israel to again ensure a seamless process so that they can continue to offer all of their students the full academic load. But again, the system of a school needing to close early for circumstances beyond anyone's control is different than a student electing to leave early. That would not work in terms of ensuring a transcript for full Israeli credit. That's the best answer I can give.
Okay. Okay. Now this is an interesting question. What is the worst thing I can do to emotionally stunt my child's growth during the year in Israel? Guess they want to know what not to do, but it's what should one do if they wanted to stunt their growth in Israel? Okay, Dr. Muscat.
I mean, I think it's obviously we don't want to focus on negatives, but I think it's really pretty much the inverse or the reverse of what we've been saying until now. So one is to insert doubt. So right from the beginning, are you sure you want to go? I'm not sure I should have sent you. I'm not sure that this is, so one is to kind of like, I guess the theme of that is to not have a boundary of our own anxiety and doubt. Once the decision is made and it's a good decision and it's been made with a lot of thought, not to insert doubt about that. To, as much as possible, not let them hear your panic, not to criticize, not to criticize the schools. So I think it could be very, we've talked about this a lot, but if you insert doubt to them about the school, they're going to carry that forward. If you have the cynicism about it, I guess to have a lack of excitement, a lack of inspiration about why they're doing this, to kind of make them feel like they're off on their own about it. So if we can get inspired, if we can get, if we can show them that we're proud of them for doing this, I think not setting any kind of boundaries, so allowing them to call, we have to remember they're going to call us sometimes at their worst moment, but also setting a boundary like, I have to go to sleep at a certain time, can you, unless there's an emergency. So not setting any kind of boundaries. I think also like instigating them. I think as parents, sometimes we can like call them more than they call us. Obviously they want to hear from us, but if they're not calling us, maybe that's not such a bad thing. I think that there's a throwback a little bit to the days that this can be an opportunity of a throwback to the days where they had to function a little more independently. And I think we could kind of, mess that up by inserting ourselves too much. I guess one last thing is like all the things that they're not going to get to do that we wanted, if we wanted to visit them, if they, to try again, not to focus on what they're not getting to do, but to try to focus on the positives and to really believe that. Our kids know when we don't believe something that we say. I think that's the biggest problem. So to try and sort of shift our mindset as much as possible. So I guess.
Anybody else want to answer that one? To add? Okay, I would just add, I think this is again, how do you stunt the child's growth? You call them 3 times a day, make them tell you every detail about everything that they're doing, make them doubt themselves, tell them that they're doing things wrong. If they have any problem, call the school, call their teacher, call the roommate, call the roommate's parents. Really get involved in every aspect of their life. That do wonders for stunting their growth. And basically tell them that they're not capable of managing their own problems and they need you to step in to solve everything for them. I think that would be really, really one way to make sure that they don't grow or learn this year. And I think bad mouthing their seminary and yeshiva is also another great strategy for this. And you do this, you'll ensure a miserable year for them and ongoing problems with self-esteem and relationship problems. So hopefully,
much better answer. You got it down to science.
Hopefully we get the point. We want to give them the space to grow and to fail and to learn themselves and to advocate for themselves. And when they call with any problem, the first answer is, what do you think you should do? How can you handle this? How can you fix this? And maybe they just need your support and your empathy and understanding. Maybe they need a little bit of guidance and coaching, but it's rare that they really need you to step in and solve the problem for them. You will be you'll be helping them solve the problem by listening and coaching. Okay, how can I help a child who is homesick? Homesick in the year in Israel. Who wants that one?
I can start, and if anyone wants to jump in, feel free. So I think it's along the same lines of what we've been saying. First, as Dr. Pelkowitz said before, it goes such a long way to just listen, right? So you want to just hear them out, let them speak to you, let them share what they miss from home, why they want to be home, or why they feel like they don't belong where they are. You don't want to jump into, solving the problem, as we've been saying the whole time, and just, picking them up, sending them a plane ticket, come right home. That would defeat the whole purpose of what we're trying to do here, which is helping, not just growing spiritually, of course, that's extremely important, and obviously is an important part of being in Israel. We want them to grow as people. We want them to develop as adults. They're in that in-between time right now, young adults. So they are, or emerging adults. So they are developing themselves, and we want to help them be able to deal with their own feelings and be able to try to overcome and be resilient and try to move through the homesickness. So that means listening. That means hearing them out. I remember, I think when I was in Israel, I was a little homesick in the beginning too. And I remember speaking to my father, and he would just listen and he would hear me. He didn't say, come home, do this, do that. He just heard me out. And then I felt like, I was able to feel much more comfortable and move through. And I think like what was helpful in that situation was having someone I could talk to. So there's a big difference between having someone you could speak to and solving all the problems. as therapists, that's kind of the balance we always do. We're trying to always keep is how do I help this person, encourage this person, empathize with this person, but not feed them all the answers and feed them everything right away so that they can feel like they just have to implement what I'm saying. I think this comes to play in homesickness too. Unless it's something that it's a severe issue, like we've been talking about, Dr. Muscat was referencing before. If someone is really, really deteriorating or really, suffering and just unable to continue in Israel, that's a separate issue, and that probably will take a few conversations to figure out. But if we're dealing with kind of regular, normal homesickness, then I think it's a balance between empathizing, listening, actively showing interest, being there for them on the phone or FaceTime, not every second of every day, like we've been saying the whole time, not every time they call, but being around and being available with kind of helping them work through and survive and accept their feelings and understand that this is normal, and normalizing it, I think, is the best way to help them not just pick up a plane ticket and come home and actually work through it and then see that they can actually enjoy the rest of their year. I don't know if you guys want to add anything.
I would just jump in with one thing about homesickness. I think homesickness is also like a code word for something else. Think about the times you've been homesick. I know people, when they first get married, sometimes all of a sudden they're homesick. Or when they go to, they move to a new city, all of a sudden they're homesick. Homesick, sort of, what does it represent? You could talk to them about, they miss the safety, they miss the freedom of being able to go into the room and lock the door and there's nobody there. They miss maybe their mother's food because it's just not the food per se, it's just like somebody made it for them and it's easy. And it tastes like home. So I think just to expand on what you're saying, I think, naming it as homesickness and then saying, homesickness it happens a lot, it's not what you miss about home, but also, not just the physical home, but what about it? Like in your own home, you're the most comfortable to say whatever you want. And that's how, not everybody has that. But that's the kind of homes we want to create. So I think it's a code word for general anxiety about something else. If you can kind of help them, obviously it's also real, but if you can, help them be curious about what's making them feel homesick, what are they homesick about? Because then once they can really pinpoint it, it can often decrease at least a little bit.
Okay, thank you. There was a request in the chat for Dr. Pelkovitz to repeat the quote he mentioned earlier. If I never fall down, I would never stand up. I think people want the source for that. That's a key point.
Yeah, so it's in the Medrash Tehillim, and it's Ilu nafalti lo kamti. If I never fell down, I never would have gotten up. Ilu yashafti bachoshech. If I never sat in the darkness, I never would have appreciated the light. The actual source, if you just remind me to send it to you, I think I have a more specific kind of reference for it in an article I wrote on coping during difficult times.
Okay. Okay. See, a question is not much of a question, but somebody wrote in that it's cruel to put kids in a room for 2 weeks and lock them up. It's cool when we put elderly people alone for Yantif and Chagim and say they can't share a Seder with anyone else either. But I don't know if any of the panelists want to comment on that. Here a parent on the one hand feels it's cruel or not fair to put children, put our children, our young adults off to Israel in this situation, but they're also still doing it. And they might be conflicted about really wanting the child to stay home, thinking that's the better option, but now feeling that they said yes and they're going to allow the child to make the decision. So it could be difficult. I don't know if anybody wants to respond to that.
Can I just say something, not from the perspective of a mental health professional, but as someone who has been in contact with our Israel schools, and Stephanie as well has, throughout the summer and really for months and months, planning for your children's arrival in Israel. They have no intention of locking them up in a room. They do have to be in isolation, but they are working very, very hard to come up with creative ways to keep them busy, to keep them engaged, to start them learning, to get them to begin socializing, even though it's not face to face. They are working very hard to make sure that the acclimation process goes smoothly and actually begins in isolation. So in terms of being fearful that our students will feel locked up, I guess there will be a certain sense of, I wish I was out there. But the schools, you can rest assured, every single one of our schools is working towards helping the students adjust even as they go into Bidud. And the other responses, I guess, can come from the panelists regarding the mental health situation.
Great answer.
Okay. Okay. Yes. I'll ask this question. What are some of the? It's actually a good, final question. What are some of the silver linings or positive of the experience that our children may experience, particularly in this year? Okay, Dr. Pelkovitz?
Yeah. Right. I think that it's interesting. I once gave a talk at Hebrew University, the Melton Center, on some research we had done on the impact of the year in Israel. Looking at it, at a group of 600 kids, and we had a study that went over 2-3 years, looking at what were the ingredients of a successful year. And I'll always remember what one of the old professors, who was well into his 70s, maybe even 80s, got up and said after I gave this talk, Israeli academic audiences are the toughest. He said, I was in Israel over 50 years ago. That's when I did, that's when I had my gap year in Israel. He says, and I still have no idea exactly what the full impact of the year was. I still don't have a full understanding of it. And to just stay with that for a little while, this is going to be, I'm pretty certain, because of what's going on, it's going to be a transformative year for our kids. But something that's been running through my mind, so I'll share it with you, is the beautiful medrash that I heard from a couple of colleagues on the meaning of the Hebrew word for hope, tikva. If you look in a dictionary, you'll see that the Hebrew word tikva is tied to the word kav, or a rope, meaning we're not dangling alone in the wind. What hope is about is that we're never alone. There's always our connection in terms of our connection with God, always our connection with ourselves, that's what tikva is about, and connection with those around us. And there's this beautiful medrash that says, Hakol b'kivui, everything needs to be dealt with hope. It says, Yisurin b'kivui, difficult times have to be dealt with hope. And Geula, ultimate redemption, is with kivui. So this is a year of hope. It's a year of connection, a year that I have a feeling, even more than previous years, has every promise of being a year of all of those concepts coming true in a way that will transform our children. I'm jealous. I wish I could be there with all of you in terms of being able to share in the experience.
Okay, that sounds like a great way to wrap up. And we all hope for all the wonderful things in the year ahead, for your children studying in Israel, learning, growing, for all of us in our communities, wishing ongoing improved and good health for all our families and for the entire world. So I wish everybody a good evening. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to the coordinators, and thank you to the parents for joining us and asking all these questions tonight. Okay.
Thank you.
You have a good night.
Sure.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.